In the last video we discussed whether or not it's possible to de-radicalize a terrorist. In this video we'll look into a harder, tougher and often violent type of counter-terrorism measure, which is the decapitation of terrorist organizations. So we're not going to look into the beheading of individuals. We're going to look into the arrest and sometimes killing of top leaders of terrorist organizations. Well, here are a few examples of groups that have been confronted with this particular counter-terrorism measure. The groups include the left-wing rebellious terrorist organization FARC from Colombia. And one of their leaders was killed in 2011, Alfonso Cano. And then there are quite a number of examples from France, Spain, with regard to the militant leaders, the terrorist leaders of the Basque separatist organization ETA. Many leaders were arrested in 2012, including Izaskun Lesaca. I'm not sure if I pronounce it well, but one of the top leaders of the ETA. And then of course, you all are aware of that. You all have seen it, probably the killing of Al-Qaeda's Osama bin Laden in Pakistan in Operation Neptune Spear, which was carried out by Navy SEALs of the United States in Abbottabad, Pakistan, early May in Pakistan 2011. But the decapitation strategy or counter-terrorism measure is as old as countering terrorism. Some historical examples include the arrest of the entire first wave of leaders of the Rote Armee faction in Germany in 1972, and the arrest of Guzman, the leader of Sendero Luminoso or Shining Path, a leftist terrorist organization in Peru in 1992. Or the arrest of the leader of the Kurdish Workers' Party, the PKK, Abdullah Öcalan, who was arrested in Kenya in 1999. There are several scholars, practitioners, politicians that have claimed that decapitation of terrorist organization works. One prominent scholar that looked into this particular instrument is Brian Price, who in 2012 wrote the following. He wrote, "Decapitation tactics which are designed to kill or capture the key leader or leaders of a terrorist group feature prominently in counter-terrorism strategies of many states, including Israel and the United States." Well, it's a widely practiced counter-terrorism measure that's been used around the globe. And after successful arrests or killing of key leaders, it's very often that politicians claim this success. They state that now the terrorist organization has been dealt a big blow. Here are a number of examples. The first is from Spain, from the then Spanish Prime Minister Zapatero, who in 2008 reacted after the arrest of the operational chief of the ETA, the Basque separatist terrorist organization. And he said that with this arrest, ETA has suffered a severe blow in its organization and capability. And he also said, today ETA is weaker. An example from South America, the Colombian president Juan Manuel Santos, after the killing of the FARC leader Alfonso Cano in 2011. He said that the killing of Cano is the hardest blow to this organization in its entire history. And then finally the reaction after the killing of Osama bin Laden, the leader of Al-Qaeda. Well, here's the reaction by Rudy Giuliani, the former mayor of New York, who was a mayor of that city in 2001. And after the killing of Osama bin Laden, he said the following. He said, "He was a symbol more than anything else right now. But symbols are important. In the long run, this will be very helpful to us in defeating Islamic terrorism. In the long run, this is a much bigger step than people realize." Why do many influential people think that decapitation works? Well, those who regard it as an effective strategy assume that the success of a terrorist organization highly depends on effective leadership. So when you kill the leader, you will weaken the organization. Well, this might be the case when a leadership struggle occurs after the death of a leader. An organization might need to devote a lot of time and energy to choose a new leader, and at the same time they're not able to carry out attacks. Or it's possible that they cannot find a new leader because others don't have the right capabilities or the right amount of experience to do so. And it could also be related to ideas and theories about charismatic leadership. Some leaders, especially those of religiously inspired groups, play a crucial role in explaining and safeguarding the group's ideology. Leaders like Osama bin Laden or the leader of the Japanese Aum sect, for instance, are being perceived as highly charismatic and a hero to some. Many people therefore think that it is very effective to eliminate those leaders because it will destabilize the organization, but it will also weaken its appeal. Why is it important to investigate whether or not decapitation of terrorist organizations works? I mentioned that many influential people say it does, and it's been practiced around the globe. But there are serious legal and ethical sides to it, especially when it concerns the killing of individuals. That's why we need to evaluate the effectiveness. Are terrorist organizations indeed weakened because of the arrest or killing of some of its leaders? Or do they simply continue to exist or even grow stronger? And what about human rights? Let us look into these questions with the help of empirical evidence and academic literature. Let me present the study by Jenna Jordan from 2009. It has the interesting title, When Heads Roll, Assessing the Effectiveness of Leadership Decapitation. In this study, she investigated 300 cases of leadership decapitation between 1945 and 2004. And she coded decapitation as a success when the terrorist organization was inactive for 2 years following that event. And she says that the key elements in assessing the effectiveness of that act are age of the group, size of the group, and the type of the group. And she found that the younger and smaller the groups, the more often they are destabilized, and that older and larger groups face less consequences. Religiously inspired terrorist organizations seem to be more or less resilient to decapitation, according to Jordan. Separatist groups remained active in almost 90% of decapitation cases, while only a third of ideological organizations, such as left-wing and right-wing organizations, are damaged by it. And then in general, in 70% of the cases, so 17% of the cases, decapitation led to the collapse of an organization. Well, that sounds interesting. But when comparing this figure with data of non-decapitated groups, she finds out that decapitated groups do not have a particular higher decline rate. So she therefore concludes that decapitation is not an effective counterterrorism measure. And she also lists a number of side effects, such as the strengthening of the group's resolve. They grow stronger because of it. Results in retaliation. They're very angry because of it. And increase of public sympathy for the organization. Well, let us now have a look at a more recent study, the one by Brian Price. In 2012, he said the following. In targeting top terrorists, how leadership decapitation contributes to counterterrorism, he said that the measure has a prominent place in many counterterrorism strategies, and he shows why this is actually a good thing. Price starts with a literature review on decapitation, and he shows that most academics say that it's not effective or even counterproductive. And he also argues that it's mainly caused by the focus of the study, the relatively short-term effects, like Jordan's study, a time horizon of 2 years. He says that is too short to really measure and appreciate the impact of decapitation. His theoretical argument is that decapitation of terrorist groups could be successful because terrorist organizations are different from other organizations. They are violent, clandestine, and values-based. Simply put, leaders of these types of organizations compared to non-violent, profit-based organizations, businesses, etc., are more important. They need to be, for instance, charismatic. And succession is more difficult because of the clandestine nature and the fact that personal characteristics and personal ideology cannot easily be replaced. He then tested this theoretical argument to see the effects of leadership decapitation on the mortality of terrorist organizations. And this led to 6 conclusions, of which the following 4 are the most striking ones. Price observes that in the long run, decapitated groups have a significantly higher mortality rate than non-decapitated groups. And he says that although only 30% of the decapitated groups ended within 2 years, which was the time horizon of Jenna Jordan, he says that in the end they have a significantly higher mortality rate. And the earlier the leadership decapitation occurs in the life cycle of that group, the more effective it will be. And he also says that the size of the groups doesn't have any impact on its duration. And then finally he says that religious terrorist groups were less resilient and easier to destroy than nationalist groups, which is very much in line with his observation about the importance of leaders of these groups. The leaders of these groups play an important role in framing and interpreting the organizational goals and strategies. And this leads to the following conclusion. Price says that states that are willing to employ leadership decapitation as part of their counterterrorism strategy should target terrorist group leaders as early as possible. These are just 2 important examples of studies that look into the effectiveness of decapitation. The authors arrive at different conclusions. Jordan says it's not effective, while Price says it is. But both point at the importance to look at the features of the organizations, the differences between the organizations, as it might have, or it's important for potential effectiveness of certain CT measures, in this case decapitation. Well, this might be the most important lesson we can draw from these 2 studies. And the success of decapitation, like many other measures, depends on the context. It's context dependent. It might work in one case, it might backfire in another. And there's certainly not one-size-fits-all solution. Successful examples are the arrest of the leaders of the Aum sect in Japan, and that of the leader of the Shining Path in Peru, and that of the Real Irish Republican Army, that almost or entirely ceased their terrorist activities after their leaders were killed or captured. But we also have unsuccessful examples, and that includes the decapitation attempts, for instance by Israel, of Hamas, and that of the Rote Armee faction in Germany. And then there's still one important aspect of this assumption that has not been addressed so far, and that's the human rights dimension. This is a particularly important dimension with regard to the drone attacks that are frequently used by the United States to, in its war on terror, to decapitate organizations like the Taliban and Al-Qaeda related organizations. Many high-ranking leaders have been killed in these strikes. Is it a success or not? Can we just now simply measure what the effect is of the organization? Will it cease? Will it destabilize or not? These drone strikes are not without controversy, as civilians have been killed. For instance, according to a highly critical report by Stanford University and New York University. And this report also states that publicly available evidence that the strikes have made the United States safer overall is ambiguous at best. It seems when determining the effectiveness of decapitation, either by drones or whatever type of instrument, we also need to know more about the short-term and long-term negative side effects. And we should not only look at simply at will it destabilize an organization or not. There's more to that. The side effects are important. To sum up, there is a variety of reasons to doubt the effectiveness of decapitation of terrorist organizations. The success depends on the type of organizations that are attacked and the modus operandi that are used. Are we talking about the arrest of leaders or the killing of persons by way of drone attacks? And of course it depends on how you measure success. But I guess in some cases decapitation of terrorist organizations does work. And that's why we label this assumption as partly true. But again, more research is needed. In the next video, we will investigate the idea that terrorism cannot be defeated.